When a judge publicly insulted Pam Bondi in court, she could have backed down, walked away embarrassed, or let it slide. Instead, she did something so bold, so unbelievable, that minutes later, the judge found himself in handcuffs. Justice wasn't just served, it was delivered in real time. And in today's world, that's truly shocking. The story starts when Pam Bondi stepped out of her silver sedan in front of the Florida State Courthouse, the July sun blazing overhead. She paused for a moment, inhaling the humid air. There was always a particular hush around courthouses, an almost sacred sense of consequence and finality that weighed on everyone who walked through the tall, fluted columns out front. That morning, however, felt charged with something more than the usual tension. Pam could sense it in the gaze of the reporters milling around the entrance. She read a mixture of curiosity and wariness in their eyes. Some offered polite nods, others snapped pictures as she passed. This was the third time in 2 weeks she'd come to this building. Each visit had involved heated disagreements with Judge Marcus Wilton, a longtime fixture in the Florida legal community and one of the most outspoken, iron-handed jurists on the circuit. Pam Bondi's presence alone was always enough to draw some attention, but this time, something bigger was brewing. She adjusted the strap of her leather briefcase over her shoulder and climbed the courthouse steps. She was here on a case that had quickly snowballed into a matter of public interest, possibly even a career-defining case for both her and Judge Wilton. What exactly made it so intense? At heart, it was a routine hearing about alleged financial misconduct by a high-profile developer. But the attorneys on the other side had the judge's ear, or so rumors claimed. Pam suspected something deeper and darker, that Judge Wilton might be compromised. She had no proof yet, only hints. Ties to the developer's largest donor, old dinners and social clubs, more than enough red flags to heighten her suspicion. Still, she tried to focus. Her job this morning was to give a short statement on why the hearing should be postponed until her office's new evidence could be reviewed. A routine procedural request, nothing that should spark a meltdown from any judge, except Judge Wilton was known to have a temperament as scorching as the Florida sun. On Pam's last visit, he'd all but dismissed her arguments before she could speak. He cut her off, raised his voice, and publicly ridiculed her lack of preparedness. She'd swallowed her pride, certain that if she took the high road, she would get another chance to present her facts calmly. Today was that chance. Yet a tingle of apprehension curled in her stomach as she pushed open the heavy wooden doors leading into the courthouse lobby. Inside, the marble floors gleamed, and a faint smell of disinfectant lingered in the air. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows, creating lines of golden light on the floor. Pam gave a polite wave to the security guards at the checkpoint. They recognized her immediately. She was, after all, a well-known public figure. "How's your morning, Ms. Bondi?" asked the elder guard with a slight grin. "We'll see," Pam answered with a small smile of her own. "Wish me luck." They laughed softly and waved her through the metal detector. She collected her briefcase on the other side, smoothed her gray tailored skirt, and continued down the hallway. Lawyers and clerks bustled past in both directions, carrying boxes of case files, flipping open laptops, or frantically typing last-minute notes on tablets. Courtroom 4A was at the far end of the corridor. Outside the door, a cluster of reporters whispered among themselves. Pam recognized some local journalists and a couple of national press members who'd picked up interest in the case for reasons that had nothing to do with Florida's typical legal drama. She was used to their presence, but there was an odd hush as she passed. One of the younger reporters, a guy with sandy hair and bright eyes, stepped up. "Pam, do you have any comment on the motion you're filing this morning?" She paused. "Just that we've uncovered new evidence that could shift the entire direction of this case. I'm only asking for a bit more time to review it before proceeding." "Judge Wilton isn't known for his patience," the reporter replied. "Are you concerned about how he'll react?" Pam offered a rueful smile. "Let's just say I'm optimistic about our justice system." In that moment, she was still clinging to the hope that professionalism and fairness would prevail. She truly believed that if she laid out her points respectfully, the judge would at least weigh her request. But as she entered the courtroom, an unexpected hush spread among the attorneys already seated at the benches. There was a storm in the air, an undercurrent of tension so thick she could almost see it swirling like humidity on a hot day. She glanced toward the bench, where the clerk was quietly setting out files and adjusting microphones. The judge's chair was empty. He hadn't arrived yet. Pam Bondi was no stranger to adversaries, even powerful ones. But something about this day felt different. She steeled herself. Whatever confrontation might come, she vowed to handle it with composure. She moved to the prosecution's table, set down her briefcase, and scanned her notes. The defense team, representing the wealthy real estate developer, was perched on the opposite side, giving her guarded looks. Their lead counsel was a seasoned lawyer named Ellis Crane, known for his ability to charm or bulldoze his way through the toughest legal battles. He caught Pam's eye and gave a tight nod. No warmth there, but a measure of respect, perhaps. Outside, the final footsteps echoed before the official session began. The bailiff announced, "All rise. Court is now in session. The Honorable Judge Marcus Wilton presiding." The door behind the bench opened. Judge Wilton stepped out in his black robe, scowling as though something in the hallway had already soured his day. Pam noticed how quickly the hush fell. Even the shuffling of papers seemed to stop. She braced herself. Little did she know, in just a few short minutes, she would experience what might be the biggest shock of her career, and the entire courtroom would witness a confrontation that would ripple beyond these walls. The judge took his seat, flipping open a leather-bound folder with a set of typed notes. He scanned the rows of benches, eyes lingering on Pam Bondi for a tense moment. Behind the stern facade, there was a flicker of something that Pam interpreted as disdain. Or perhaps it was just the man's perpetual glower. He wasted no time. "We have a crowded docket today," he said, voice echoing through the speakers. "Let's get to the matter of State versus Garson Development. Ms. Bondi, you've filed a motion for postponement?" Pam stood, clearing her throat. "Yes, Your Honor. My office came into possession of new evidence that may significantly affect the direction of the prosecution. We request a short delay to properly review and integrate the findings." She kept her tone even and professional. This was standard procedure in many cases, especially one involving voluminous financial records. Judge Wilton merely stared for a heartbeat longer than comfortable. "A short delay, is it?" He turned to the defense. "Mr. Crane, do you have any objection?" Crane stood. "Naturally, Your Honor, we do. My client has been under scrutiny for months. Delaying this hearing any further would be a grave injustice to his personal and professional reputation. The prosecution has had ample time." Pam calmly raised her hand. "If I may, Your Honor, we only received these records 3 days ago through an anonymous tip. They've been partially verified, but we need to confirm their authenticity." "What did I just say about the crowded docket, Ms. Bondi?" The judge snapped, cutting her off in mid-sentence. A startled hush fell on the courtroom. Pam blinked. She expected a firm approach from Wilton, but his tone was sharper than usual. She tried again, pressing her point carefully. "Yes, Your Honor, I realize the docket is tight, but these documents contain thousands of lines of transactions. We can't simply—" He slammed a palm onto the bench. "I don't care if it's 1,000 lines or 1,000,000 lines. You're telling this court that after months of preparation, you're still not ready to proceed?" Pam's cheeks flushed, but she remained steady. "The defense is fully aware that financial cases often hinge on late discoveries. I'm simply asking for 2 weeks. And how do we know," the judge said, leaning forward with a cold gleam in his eye, "that this is not just another one of your convenient stall tactics?" The temperature in the courtroom seemed to spike. People shuffled, uncertain. Pam struggled to maintain an even tone. "With all due respect, Your Honor, I've never engaged in any stalling. My record speaks—" He let out a derisive snort. "Your record? Ms. Bondi, let me be blunt. You come into my courtroom with these last-minute so-called revelations every time you're behind on a case. Perhaps if your office were better organized, or if you were more competent, you would have the evidence ready when you're supposed to." Pam felt like the floor had tilted beneath her. This was no ordinary judicial scolding. It was personal. She glanced at the row of reporters in the gallery. She could see them shifting, sensing the drama unfolding. If she showed even a flicker of anger, that's what would make the headlines. She forced a neutral expression. Her heart drummed in her chest, though. These were not just harsh words. They were humiliating. Quietly, she replied, "Your Honor, I believe you're mischaracterizing my professional conduct." He cut her off again. "Am I? Because from where I'm sitting, you're about to waste this court's time with more fishing expeditions. Garson Development's attorneys have made it clear they're ready to proceed. Are you telling me that your office can't handle its workload? She tried to keep her voice calm, though she felt her pulse in her ears. Sir, I'm telling you that if we proceed without properly reviewing crucial documents, it could lead to an incomplete or flawed prosecution, which is neither in the interest of justice nor the integrity of this court. A flicker of annoyance shot across the judge's face. He lifted a stack of papers and let them drop back onto his desk with a thud. Integrity! He spat the word out like a shard of glass. You want to talk about integrity while you stand here and sabotage this hearing? Where is your evidence of sabotage? He aimed a finger at her. Produce your so-called new findings right now, if they're so vital. Pam swallowed. She had a summary in her folder, but it was incomplete. Presenting it prematurely could undermine her entire case. Your Honor, I only have a preliminary outline. The raw data is still being processed for authenticity. If I present them incorrectly, he waved a dismissive hand. Save it. I'm tired of these excuses. For a moment, she thought she saw a triumphant glint in Ellis Crane's eyes at the defense table. He was watching the judge systematically dismantle Pam's credibility without her having a fair chance to respond. And then Judge Wilton took a step she never saw coming. He leaned into the microphone, his tone dropping to a menacing hush. Ms. Bondi, I have to question whether you're even fit to continue prosecuting this matter. Your repeated delays, your lack of preparedness. Frankly, I'm not sure if you are competent enough for a case of this magnitude. A gasp fluttered through the courtroom. This went beyond a simple denial of emotion. This was an attack on Pam's professional reputation, launched publicly from the bench. Pam's stomach knotted. She'd heard rumors that Judge Wilton had his allegiances, but she never expected such a blatant show of hostility. The entire hearing felt hijacked by personal animus. She forced herself to remain poised. She had to object, calmly, clearly. With respect, Your Honor, she said, I will not stand here and be insulted. I'm fulfilling my duty, which requires me to ensure that all relevant evidence is properly examined. This is standard procedure, and I request that the court treat me and my office with the respect owed to any officer of the law. Her voice trembled slightly, but she held her ground. The judge's eyes flashed with anger. You want respect? He hissed, loud enough for everyone to hear. Earn it. Don't march in here like some political opportunist, running headlines at the expense of real justice. Perhaps the state should find someone else, someone more capable, to handle this matter. You're obviously in over your head. Pam inhaled sharply. She heard a flurry of whispers behind her. Cameras clicked. She could see the defense attorneys exchanging smirks. Meanwhile, the judge hammered away, unrelenting. Your motion for postponement is denied, he said, glaring at her. And if you continue with this line of nonsense, I won't hesitate to hold you in contempt. Do I make myself clear? She could hardly believe what she was hearing. In her career, she had contended with judges who disagreed with her, even scolded her, but this level of verbal aggression, this blatant attempt to humiliate her, was extraordinary. Her heart pounded as the word contempt echoed in her mind. She realized in that instant that the judge wasn't just being tough. It felt like he had a personal vendetta. Maintaining whatever composure she could, Pam nodded. Yes, Your Honor, she murmured, then sank back into her seat, face warm with a mixture of anger and embarrassment. For the next half hour, the hearing proceeded, though Pam barely registered the words. She could feel eyes on her, journalists, attorneys, spectators. Some were sympathetic, others curious, still others feasting on the controversy. Judge Wilton's every pronouncement carried a mocking edge. He refused to let her present even the summary of new findings. He insisted they move forward with testimony next week, with no delays. By the end of it, Pam felt battered. When the judge slammed his gavel and declared a recess, she exhaled in relief. She glanced around, searching for an exit strategy that might allow her to avoid the media swarm. But escape wasn't going to be easy. A humiliating defeat in the courtroom is one thing. The next confrontation, moments away, would prove far more explosive. Little did she know, the judge himself was about to be caught in a startling turn of events that would rewrite the entire narrative. As soon as Judge Wilton stepped off the bench and disappeared into his chambers, the courtroom erupted with murmuring. Journalists buzzed, lighting up their phones and cameras to document the sensational clash. Pam fumbled to gather her files, her hands trembling with leftover adrenaline. She needed to get out, take a breath, and figure out her next move. but something unexpected happened. A bailiff walked over to her. He was a tall, broad-shouldered man in his 40s, with concern etched on his face. "Ms. Bondi, ma'am," he said quietly. "Would you mind coming with me for a moment?" Confused, she glanced around. Several people had paused to watch. "Why?" He leaned in. "I think there's something you need to see." She hesitated. There was no immediate reason to trust or distrust him. Bailiffs usually stayed neutral, just maintaining order. But the look in his eyes was genuine. She nodded slowly, and he led her toward a side corridor that branched off from the main courtroom area. The corridor was quiet, lined with framed portraits of past judges. Pam noticed the slight hush as the heavy wooden door fell shut behind them. "What is this about?" she asked. He hesitated before responding. "There's a woman who's been trying to get a message to you. She's waiting in the witness consultation room, says she has information relevant to your case and to what just happened in there with the judge." Pam's pulse quickened. "Information about Wilton?" He nodded gravely. "Yes. If you want my opinion, she seems credible, but you'll need to decide for yourself." They walked a few paces further, turning into a small windowless room. Inside waited a woman of perhaps 50, dressed in conservative business attire, hair pulled back into a neat bun. She clutched a brown envelope with white knuckles, her expression tense and anxious. When Pam entered, the woman stood. "Ms. Bondi, I'm so sorry to bother you. Thank you for seeing me." Pam gave her a polite smile, though her mind still spun from the morning's fiasco. "I'm always willing to talk to a witness," she said. "But we haven't met before, have we?" "I'm Mary Rivers," the woman said quietly. "I used to work in the clerk's office here, about 2 years ago, as an administrative aide. Before that, I was with the City Council's budgeting committee." Pam nodded slowly. "Okay. So you have some connection to this building. What do you need to tell me?" Mary clutched the envelope tighter. "I know you're prosecuting Garson Development. I also know Judge Wilton is presiding, and I suspect he's compromised." Pam froze, the exact suspicion she'd been nurturing. "Why do you think that?" Mary exhaled shakily, then handed the envelope to Pam. Inside were a series of photocopied documents, emails, memos, and bank statements. Pam flipped through them with growing astonishment. They appeared to show a pattern of suspicious transactions, payments from accounts associated with certain real estate interests, funneling into a trust that Wilton's family controlled. They also included communications referencing Wilton's name, along with veiled references to favorable rulings. Pam's heart pounded. If these documents were real, it was explosive, a direct link between the judge and a potential bribe or at least unethical financial influence. Her eyes scanned line after line. "This can't be. Where did you get these?" Mary lowered her gaze. "When I worked in the clerk's office, I had routine access to financial disclosures, certain sealed documents, and administrative correspondences. I noticed anomalies. I tried to bring them up with the office manager, but she told me to forget it. Then I went to HR, but they brushed me off. Eventually, I was pressured to resign." Pam inhaled slowly. "So you kept copies?" Mary nodded. "I knew it was risky, but I felt I had a duty. I didn't know who to trust. Every time I tried to raise the alarm, I was shut down. Then, once I heard you were on this case, Garson Development, I realized Judge Wilton's connections to these real estate moguls might be relevant." Pam's mind whirled. It all made sense. Wilton's hostility might not just be personal. If he had ties, financial ties, to the developer or their allies, he'd have every reason to undermine Pam's prosecution. He might be trying to bury the case, to ensure his own secrets stayed hidden. No wonder he'd publicly insulted her, ridiculed her in court. He was protecting himself. "This is huge," Pam managed, her voice trembling with excitement and anger. "But verifying authenticity will be critical. The defense will argue these are fabricated." Mary sighed. "I know. That's why I brought you the originals, too." She reached into her bag and pulled out another smaller folder of official-looking documents, sheets with official stamps, watermarks, digital signatures. "I risked a lot to keep these. They might be enough to prove the pattern." Pam carefully leafed through them, each detail confirming the suspicion that Wilton had a clandestine financial arrangement with at least one of the companies under the developer's umbrella. It could blow everything wide open. She breathed. She looked up at Mary. Thank you. This is exactly the kind of tip we needed to unravel potential corruption. If the judge is compromised, he should not be sitting on this case. Or any case. Mary's face flickered with relief and fear. I need your protection, Ms. Bondi. If he finds out I leaked these… Pam gently placed her hand on Mary's shoulder. You did the right thing. I'll see to it you're protected. I'll move fast on this, trust me. You came at just the right time. She was already imagining how to proceed, an urgent petition for Wilton's recusal, or even an investigation by the Judicial Qualifications Commission. If validated, these documents could lead to the judge's suspension, or worse. Pam offered Mary her card. Please call me directly if you feel threatened in any way. Don't speak to the press about this yet. I want to handle it carefully and ensure it leads to real action. Mary nodded, tears of relief welling in her eyes. Thank you, Ms. Bondi. I'm not looking for fame. I just want justice done. As Pam stepped back into the corridor, her chest felt tight with a strange mixture of victory and trepidation. The truth was out there, lying in her hands. She flicked through the documents once more, heart hammering. A judge, verbally attacking a prosecutor in open court while apparently receiving undisclosed funds from the opposing side's sphere of influence? It was beyond unethical. It was criminal. Pam Bondi realized with a jolt that if these proofs stood up, the very man who'd insulted her so viciously minutes ago might find himself in handcuffs sooner than anyone expected. By the time Pam returned to the main corridor, the buzz of chatter had intensified. People were leaving for lunch breaks or heading to other courtrooms. A few reporters lingered, hoping for a quote or reaction. Pam clutched the envelope under her arm, scanning for a quiet spot to make a phone call. She needed her team on this, immediately. She found a small alcove near the courthouse library and dialed her lead investigator, Rhonda Maxwell, a no-nonsense woman with a background in forensic accounting. Pam's heart still pounded as she listened to the ring. Rhonda picked up. Boss, that you? How's court going? Pam exhaled. Not great, but I might have just been handed a game changer. I have documents here that potentially link Judge Wilton to financial misconduct, serious misconduct. I'm talking bribes. Rhonda let out a low whistle. You're sure they're legit? Hard to say at first glance, but they look genuine. Watermarks, official stamps. They reference real accounts. I need you to cross-check them as soon as possible. Send them over. I'll get on it right away. Pam hesitated. These are all hard copies. I'll see if I can scan them in using the library copier. I want your eyes on them, and I want them under lock and key. I hear you, Rhonda said. This is big. If you're right, we need to keep it tight. No leaks, no big announcements until we verify. Because you know the judge will do everything in his power to discredit you if he catches wind of it first. Pam nodded grimly, even though Rhonda couldn't see her. Understood. I'll be at the office in an hour. Keep a secure channel open. And, Rhonda, be careful with this. Rhonda's voice was serious. Always am. Pam ended the call. She tried to steady her breathing. The next step was scanning the documents quickly so her team could start verifying each piece of data. Then she could prepare to file a motion to recuse Judge Wilton. The last thing she wanted was to appear in his courtroom again, where he could sabotage her case or take worse actions. But somewhere in the back of her mind, she knew that if the judge was as compromised as these papers suggested, he might already have eyes everywhere. The tension around her was almost suffocating. Gathering her nerve, Pam slipped into the courthouse library. She nodded a quick greeting to the librarian on duty, a middle-aged woman engrossed in stamping some returned law journals. Pam moved to the far corner, where a self-service copier stood. The fluorescent overhead lights hummed softly. With hands that still shook slightly, she began feeding pages into the scanner, watching the progress bar crawl across the small display screen. Occasionally, someone walked by, but no one gave her more than a passing glance. She tried to keep her expression neutral, though her mind was racing. The memory of Judge Wilton's tirade just an hour earlier played on a loop. The man had all but labeled her incompetent, yet now she held the potential key to exposing him, perhaps even sending him to prison if the evidence of corruption was strong enough. Page after page, she scanned the documentation. Names, account numbers, email addresses, some redacted, some not. Memos referencing cooperative judges and beneficial rulings. She saw dates that lined up suspiciously well with previous cases Wilton had presided over. The pattern was undeniable, if proven legitimate. Finally, she printed a confirmation sheet listing all the scans. She grabbed the envelope, along with the originals, and turned to leave. In that moment, her phone buzzed. She jumped slightly, then pulled it out, expecting maybe Rhonda. Instead, the screen displayed an unknown number. She hit accept. Hello? A distorted voice, thick with static, spoke. Ms. Bondi? She paused, every muscle tensing. Yes. Who is this? A beat of silence. Then, you really should be careful with documents like that. You never know whose toes you're stepping on. Her stomach clenched. Excuse me. A cold chuckle. There are people who don't appreciate your little fishing expedition. People with very deep pockets and strong influence. You might want to rethink your next move. Pam's grip tightened on the phone. Are you threatening me? All I'm saying is that it's a dangerous world, Ms. Bondi. We wouldn't want to see your career or your health compromised by foolish ambition. She glared at the copier as if the entire building had ears. If you have a problem with my investigation, you should talk to law enforcement, not make anonymous calls. Another mocking laugh. Law enforcement is exactly what we're worried about. Good day, Ms. Bondi. The line went dead. Pam let out a shaky breath, fury kindling in her chest. Someone was trying to intimidate her. Possibly someone close to Wilton or the developer. She refused to be bullied. Quickly, she pocketed her phone and hurried out of the library, the documents clutched protectively. She marched down the hallway, ignoring the stares from a few straggling reporters. One thought pounded in her mind. She had to act fast. Whatever she did next, she couldn't give Wilton, nor any of his associates, a chance to bury this evidence. And if the phone call was any indication, they were already onto her. Less than an hour later, Pam burst into her own downtown office. It was a modest legal suite, with beige walls and rows of metal filing cabinets, a place she'd known for years. But today it felt almost alien, as if danger lurked behind every door. Rhonda Maxwell was waiting by Pam's desk, laptop open, phone pinned between shoulder and ear. She waved Pam in. Yes, she spoke into the phone. Get me the updated records for the trust account, exactly. Cross-reference with the clerk's office statement. Good. She hung up and turned to Pam. You okay? Pam let out a breath. Someone called my cell from a blocked number, basically threatened me. They know I have these documents. Rhonda's lips thinned. These must be the real deal then. That's my guess. Pam carefully set the envelope down. Any initial thoughts from what I scanned over? Rhonda tapped the laptop keyboard, revealing side-by-side charts. I've been cross-referencing a few account numbers already. A couple belong to shell companies that funnel money to a trust under the name of Wilton's wife. Then there's a separate set for his cousin. It's a spider web, but it all leads back to the same core group of real estate investors. Pam's eyes traced the lines on the screen. And at least one of them is closely tied to Garson Development. Probably the same entity paying for Wilton's under-the-table cooperation. Rhonda nodded. This is enough to file a complaint with the Judicial Qualifications Commission, possibly the state attorney's office or the FBI if we suspect federal crimes. But we'll want to do a deeper dive first, to be bulletproof. Pam chewed her lip. I don't want to wait too long. Right now, Wilton is still presiding over my case. He can do tremendous damage. He threatened to hold me in contempt if I keep pushing, or he could dismiss charges entirely and bury the entire prosecution. Rhonda closed her laptop. Let's keep verifying on our end, but also talk to the JQC. We can request an emergency review. Judges are subject to certain immediate suspensions when corruption evidence is credible. Pam nodded, adrenaline spiking. Let's do it. I'll call them now. She reached for her phone, but just as her hand touched it, the device started buzzing on the desk. The caller ID. Unknown number. She glanced at Rhonda with a mix of dread and exasperation. Again? She answered on speaker. Pam Bondi. A deep male voice resonated. Ms. Bondi, this is Lieutenant Frank Moreno with the Courthouse Police Unit. I'm calling regarding an incident that just took place involving Judge Wilton. I understand you were in his courtroom this morning? Pam's eyes met Rhonda's. An incident? Yes, Lieutenant, I was. What's going on? The man cleared his throat. We received a formal complaint and, well, we've detained Judge Wilton for questioning. For a heartbeat, the room seemed to freeze. Rhonda stared, mouth open. Pam blinked. Detained him? On what grounds? Moreno hesitated. It's complicated. There were allegations of erratic behavior in his chambers, destruction of property. Some staff said he was violently throwing files and making threats after the hearing. We also got wind of potential corruption from an anonymous tip. We're holding him for now while we investigate, but I understand you might have evidence that could be relevant. Pam's mouth felt dry. I do. Lieutenant, I have documents that tie him financially to real estate companies, possibly explaining his meltdown in court. Would you be willing to bring them down and make a statement? Moreno asked. This is all happening fast, but we want to do this by the book. Pam shot a glance at Rhonda, who was already closing her laptop in anticipation. Yes, Pam replied. I'll be there as soon as possible. She hung up, mind spinning. Judge Wilton had been detained. Not necessarily arrested for a crime, yet, but certainly pulled in. Part of Pam felt a jolt of vindication. The man who'd humiliated her in open court was now facing consequences, but the speed of these developments startled her. She turned to Rhonda. We need to make sure we're ready. Let's bring everything we have. If they formally arrest him, these documents will be critical in building the case. Rhonda grabbed her bag. I'll drive. Pam took a moment, scanning her office. The phone call from the courthouse, the earlier threat in the library, the new evidence of corruption. It all crackled in her mind, an electric storm of events unfolding in real time. She thought back to that morning, the judge's face twisted in scorn, telling her she was incompetent. Yet here she was, about to present evidence that could unravel him entirely. She felt no joy, no smugness, just a grave sense of purpose. The afternoon sun was beginning to dip, painting the courthouse plaza in long shadows, when Pam and Rhonda parked their car in a side lot near the police wing of the building. The Florida heat had mellowed slightly, but the humidity lingered. Together, they marched up the steps, Pam clutching her file, Rhonda with her laptop bag. Inside, a uniformed officer led them to a small precinct office attached to the courthouse. They passed desks piled with case folders, phones ringing, the pungent smell of black coffee in the air. Lieutenant Moreno, a tall man in a crisp uniform, greeted them in a short hallway. Ms. Bondi? Ms. Maxwell? He shook their hands. This way, please. They followed him into a narrow room that functioned as a conference area. An old rectangular table stood in the center, lined with mismatched chairs. Moreno closed the door behind them. Judge Wilton is in an interview room, he explained quietly. He's not under formal arrest yet, but we've read him his rights. He's refusing to answer questions without his attorney present. Meanwhile, we're gathering statements and evidence. Pam nodded. Tell me more about the complaint. You said staff reported him threatening people. Moreno sighed. According to multiple witnesses, after the morning hearing, Wilton returned to his chambers in a rage. He apparently started tossing around case files. He yelled that he'd destroy certain individuals, even made references to hurting Ms. Bondi, though we can't confirm that. One of his clerks got scared enough to call us. By the time we arrived, he was calm but refused to cooperate. Then we got the anonymous tip about possible bribery, so we took him in for questioning. Rhonda arched an eyebrow. Anonymous tip, you say? That might be Mary Rivers or someone else who also had these documents. Pam placed her file on the table. Inside, you'll find evidence of significant financial misconduct. If this is validated, Wilton could be facing bribery charges, money laundering, who knows what else. Moreno nodded gravely. One of our detectives will review this. We'll coordinate with the relevant prosecutorial authorities. Ms. Bondi, you understand we may ask you to recuse yourself from personally prosecuting Wilton, given you're a direct witness and also the subject of his outburst. Pam had expected that. I understand. My role right now is just to provide the evidence. I'll let the appropriate agencies handle the actual case against him. I'm more concerned about removing him from the Garson hearing so that corruption case can proceed without sabotage. Moreno jotted notes. We'll pass that along to the chief judge. Likely, Wilton's docket will be reassigned immediately. Pam felt a weight lift from her shoulders. The barrier that had threatened her entire prosecution was crumbling, yet she couldn't shake the image of Wilton's face contorted in anger, nor the memory of that anonymous threat call. "Any sense of how Wilton's responding to being detained?" she asked carefully. "He's furious," Moreno said flatly. "Keeps insisting that this is a political hit job. He demanded to be released immediately, claiming judicial immunity, but that doesn't apply to crimes like this. We're proceeding carefully, mindful of the gravity of accusing a sitting judge, but the evidence so far is enough to keep him here until we sort it out." Rhonda and Pam exchanged glances. "I hope you have good security in place," Pam said. "Anyone with Judge Wilton's connections might be desperate to protect him." The lieutenant gave a slight nod. "We're aware. We have plainclothes and uniformed officers stationed around. He's not going anywhere without an official resolution." And so it was, with surreal swiftness, that Judge Marcus Wilton, who just hours earlier had insulted Pam Bondi in open court, found himself in a police interview room on the verge of criminal charges. Pam handed over the final documentation to Moreno. "I'll stay available for any follow-ups. I want to see justice done." Moreno slipped the documents into a secure evidence folder. "We appreciate your cooperation. I'll keep you updated." By the time Pam and Rhonda stepped back outside, dusk had settled over the plaza. City lights were flickering on, and a hush hung in the heavy, warm air. But the hush didn't last. The moment they appeared, a group of reporters who'd evidently heard rumors about the judge's detention hurried over. "Ms. Bondi, is it true Judge Wilton has been arrested?" shouted one, a camera thrust forward. "Pam, how do you respond to allegations that you set the judge up?" demanded another, microphone nearly touching her face. She raised a hand. "I'm not commenting on details of any ongoing investigation. You'll have to direct your questions to the police department." "Is this because of your heated exchange in court this morning?" a reporter pressed. "Did you file a complaint?" Pam kept her voice firm but polite. "Again, please direct inquiries to the authorities. I have nothing else to add at this time." With that, she and Rhonda navigated through the throng, ignoring the hail of questions. They reached their car and slid inside, exhaling in relief as Pam locked the doors. Rhonda turned to Pam. "You know this is going to explode in the media. Judge Wilton is a big name, and a lot of people are going to wonder if your conflict with him is behind his detention." Pam nodded, pressing her fingertips to her temples. "I know, but the truth will come out, and the documents will speak for themselves. If he was taking bribes, that's the story, not me." Rhonda gave a small smile. "Well, you certainly took the moral high ground after that fiasco in court. He humiliated himself by lashing out, and now the real story is about corruption. Couldn't have turned out more ironically." Pam stared out the windshield at the looming courthouse. "It's not over yet. There's bound to be pushback. People with money and influence don't go down quietly." "You're right," Rhonda agreed, turning the key in the ignition. "But let's hope the law stands firm." They pulled away from the curb, a swirl of camera flashes capturing them as they disappeared into the night. In the days that followed, news outlets exploded with variations of the same headline. "Florida judge detained over possible corruption ties, clash with prosecutor Pam Bondi under scrutiny." Every major network seemed to have a panel of legal experts dissecting the situation. Some speculated that Pam had orchestrated a takedown. Others lauded her for exposing wrongdoing. Even political talking heads weighed in, turning it into a partisan debate. Yet behind the media frenzy, real legal actions were underway. The Judicial Qualifications Commission launched an immediate investigation. The chief judge of the circuit reassigned all of Wilton's cases, including the high-profile Garson development prosecution, to a different judge known for integrity and fairness. That alone felt like a massive victory for Pam's team, ensuring the defendant wouldn't have an unfair advantage in the upcoming hearing. Meanwhile, Pam maintained a low profile, focusing on verifying the evidence Mary Rivers had provided. She discovered more connections: campaign donations, property deeds, shell corporations. Each piece of the puzzle painted Wilton as a judge who had spent years leveraging his position for personal gain. It was staggering and horrifying. Pam couldn't help but wonder how many other cases might have been tainted under his watch. On the 5th day after Wilton's detention, Pam returned to her office after a deposition, her shoulders aching. She found Rhonda waiting, brow furrowed, reading something on her phone. "What is it?" Pam asked, dread coiling in her gut. Rhonda exhaled sharply. Just saw a statement from Wilton's newly hired defense attorney. They're claiming Wilton was framed by you. Pam dropped her briefcase onto a chair. Of course they are. She sank into her desk chair. They have to spin it somehow. What's the gist? Rhonda scrolled. That you doctored documents, bribed a disgruntled former clerk to lie, all because Wilton embarrassed you in court. They're calling you vindictive and incompetent. They say you manipulated the evidence to force his removal, so you could secure a conviction in the Garson case. Pam rubbed her temples. This is exactly what I expected. They have no other defense but to discredit me. Let them talk. I have Mary's testimony, plus all the forensic data. Unless they want to claim every bank record is fake, they don't stand a chance in court. Rhonda nodded, but she looked uneasy. Still, you might want to prepare for the public battle. If they go on talk shows, you'll be forced to respond. I'll respond with facts, Pam said firmly. The documents speak for themselves, and if they push me, I'll personally put Mary Rivers and our forensic accountants on the stand. They can't dismiss the entire chain of evidence. Yet even as she spoke, a cold fear nestled in the back of her mind. What if Wilton's allies resorted to more than just a smear campaign? She recalled the anonymous threat call. People capable of bribing a judge might not hesitate to silence inconvenient witnesses. She locked eyes with Rhonda. We should keep Mary safe. She's the key whistleblower here. Make sure she has police protection if she needs it. Rhonda pulled out her phone. I'll arrange it. A week later, a bombshell new piece of evidence landed on Pam's desk. The FBI, alerted by the Judicial Commission, had seized computers from Wilton's home and judicial chambers. Among the files, they found email exchanges that blatantly discussed favorable rulings in exchange for financial support. The language was coded, but not subtle enough to hide the meaning. For Pam, it was the final nail in the coffin. No matter what Wilton's defense team spun, these emails were direct communications between Wilton and an agent for the developer's network. He wasn't just taking money as a subtle gift. He was actively exchanging legal outcomes for bribes. When Pam read the emails, a chill raced down her spine. This is it. There was no turning back for Wilton. He would have to face charges. That same day, the Florida Attorney General's office announced formal charges against him: bribery, misconduct in office, and multiple other felonies. The arrest was swift. No more detention and questioning. This time, they read him the charges outright. Cameras captured the moment he was escorted from a courthouse side door, wearing civilian clothes rather than his robe, face pale but defiant. Pam watched it unfold on a small TV in the corner of her office. She felt a strange mixture of relief and sorrow. No matter how monstrous he'd been, no matter how shady his actions, seeing a judge in handcuffs was a stark reminder that the system was fragile, and corruption at high levels tarnished public trust. Rhonda turned off the TV. It's done. He's officially booked. Pam nodded, looking down at her hands. The next step is a trial. The Attorney General will likely take the lead. I just hope the public sees that the law can self-correct when necessary. It will, Rhonda said gently. You did good work, Pam. You were the catalyst, even if you don't end up prosecuting him personally. Pam paused, reflecting on all that had transpired since that humiliating morning in court. I never imagined it would escalate this fast, but I'm glad justice is being served. With Wilton removed from the bench, Pam's original case against Garson Development moved forward under a new judge, known for fairness and impartiality. The difference was night and day. No sneering or personal attacks, no undue obstacles. Pam presented the new evidence about financial fraud with calm efficiency, and the judge approved her request for more time to analyze the late-arriving documents. The local press, once fixated on her feud with Wilton, turned attention back to the actual facts of the case. They reported on the alleged wrongdoing by the developer, the suspicious land deals, and the ramifications for Florida's environmental regulations. Meanwhile, Wilton's downfall became a separate saga, a cautionary tale about the perils of corruption. Mary Rivers agreed to testify in Wilton's upcoming trial. Protected by a strong legal shield, she felt safer. She met with Pam one more time, expressing gratitude. I'm just relieved to see the truth come out, Mary said softly. Pam clasped her hands. Thanks to you. Without your courage, he might still be on the bench, controlling outcomes behind the scenes. Mary gave a tremulous smile. You stood up to him too. A lot of people would have backed down after he insulted them in open court. Pam felt a pang, remembering that day. I won't say it was easy, but bullies thrive when people stay quiet. I couldn't let that happen. She thought about the moment the judge first hammered his gavel, scolding her in front of a packed courtroom. In the end, the very arrogance that led him to believe he was invincible ended up exposing his corruption. In the midst of these broader developments, the actual minute-by-minute story of Wilton's arrest circulated in rumor. Some said that right after insulting Pam, he retreated to his office, discovered that a tipster had spilled his secrets, and lost his temper, ripping up documents that might have incriminated him. Others claimed he tried to bribe a bailiff or threatened a clerk. The courthouse gossip networks were on fire with speculation, but the official record stated that Wilton had a meltdown, threatened staff, and was detained by security. By the time Pam's evidence made its way to the authorities, they had enough cause to question him. And in a karmic twist, it happened on the very same day he'd publicly dressed her down. Judge insults Pam Bondi in court. Minutes later, she gets him arrested, was the sensational headline across social media platforms, fueling endless commentary. Bloggers asked if Pam had orchestrated the entire scenario, but that was more theatrics than reality. In truth, Wilton arrested himself the moment he chose corruption. All Pam did was shine a light on it. Weeks passed. The Garson case progressed methodically, building a foundation for what Pam believed would be a strong prosecution. Outside of that, the public grew fascinated by the Wilton trial, which quickly overshadowed the typical gossip that floods tabloids. Document leaks, phone calls, hush payments. Every new revelation was more sensational than the last. Pam stayed somewhat peripheral to the media firestorm, content to focus on her own docket. But she couldn't avoid the trial entirely. She was subpoenaed to testify about Wilton's actions in court, specifically the morning he tried to intimidate her. On the day she took the stand, she wore a subdued navy suit and spoke firmly about the judge's outburst, her motion, and how he'd refused to hear her evidence. She recounted his personal insults, how he labeled her incompetent. The defense attorney tried to spin it, implying Pam had a personal grudge. But she calmly reiterated the timeline, that she only received the crucial corruption documents after the hearing from Mary Rivers. She had no role in manufacturing them. The facts were on her side. After her testimony, Pam left the courtroom, ignoring the flash of cameras. She felt a sense of closure. Whatever else Wilton's team tried, they could not bury the trove of emails, bank records, and witness statements. The final verdict would be up to the jury, but it seemed inevitable. It took less than 2 days of deliberation. The jury found Wilton guilty on multiple counts, including bribery, conspiracy, and official misconduct. He was led out of the courtroom in handcuffs, face ashen, eyes downcast. The media dubbed it a historic fall from grace, a once respected judge undone by greed. For Pam Bondi, that moment was bittersweet. She felt no triumph in watching a judge's life unravel. She wished he hadn't tarnished the bench in the first place. Still, upholding the integrity of the legal system was paramount. If anything, Wilton's downfall showcased that no one, no matter how powerful, is above the law. And for those who had watched Wilton publicly belittle Pam, the outcome held a stark lesson. Sometimes, the loudest insults mask the deepest guilt. Months later, Pam sat in a quiet cafe just a few blocks from the courthouse. She was flipping through a local newspaper. Tucked away on page 3 was a small article about the continuing ramifications of Wilton's conviction. Old cases were being reviewed, appeals filed. The system was busy cleaning up the mess. She set the paper aside and sipped her iced tea, letting her mind wander back to that fateful morning. She could practically hear the judge's voice. Perhaps if your office were more competent. She recalled how humiliating it felt, standing there, being scolded like an incompetent novice. Then, the swift turn of events. A tip from Mary, the discovery of damning evidence, the judge's meltdown and detention. In less than an hour, the entire power dynamic had flipped. What if Mary had never found the courage to come forward? What if Pam had slunk away, deciding not to challenge a powerful figure? So many small decisions combined to shape that day's outcome. Perhaps it was destiny that Wilton's brazen hubris collided with Pam's determination. Or maybe it was just the unstoppable force of truth, determined to find the light. As Pam drained the last of her tea, she felt a sense of resolve. She thought of all the future cases she would handle, the upcoming challenges. The legal world could be messy, rife with politics and hidden agendas. Yet the story of Wilton's arrest reminded her that justice could still prevail, even in the face of intimidation. She'd keep fighting for that ideal, no matter how many judges or wealthy defendants tried to intimidate her again. She stood, left a tip on the table, and stepped into the Florida sunshine. The air was warm, almost stifling, but it felt good on her skin. She headed down the sidewalk, mind already drifting to the next hearing. Yes, her next hearing might be calmer, or it might be another whirlwind. Either way, she'd walk into that courtroom with her head held high, carrying the memory of the day the law turned on a corrupt judge who tried to crush her spirit and failed spectacularly. And that, friends, is the unbelievable tale of the day a judge hurled insults at Pam Bondi, only to end up detained and eventually convicted mere minutes later. In a world where power often seems untouchable, sometimes the biggest shock isn't a fierce confrontation or a devastating insult. It's the moment truth surfaces and topples the seemingly invincible. If this story resonated with you, if it reminded you that corruption can hide in the highest places, and that courage in the face of intimidation can change everything, do me a favor and tap that like button. Share this video to spread the word that nobody is above the law and that standing up for justice, even when you're insulted or mocked, can lead to real change. And if you're hungry for more stories of dramatic courtroom twists and surprising acts of courage, check out the next video appearing on your screen now. Click it to uncover another unforgettable moment when someone fought back against a rigged system and won. Thanks for watching. And until next time, remember, integrity has a way of prevailing, even if it takes just one brave person to shine the spotlight on the truth.